This week's Torah portion contains some of the many laws that require us to help our brethren in times of need. Those laws take many different forms. We have to donate between 10 and 20% of our income for charity to the poor. We have an obligation to extend interest-free loans. We have to help our friends find and keep jobs. We have to offer advice. We have to donate our time to the community. There's a less well-known obligation that rests on the community itself. If a wealthy person loses his money and becomes poor, then the community has to support that person at the level of lifestyle to which he was previously accustomed. The example that the Talmud gives us is that if that person used to have a horse to ride on and a servant to run in front of it, presumably to announce his arrival, then the community has to supply those things. In fact, Hillel, the great sage, once arranged for a horse for a formerly wealthy person who had become poor to ride on, and a servant to run in front of the horse. And one day the servant didn't show up, and Hillel could not find an adequate substitute. So Hillel, the great sage, ran in front of the horse himself. Now, of course, if the charitable coffers only have enough money to provide for basic necessities for the poor, then the community won't be able to provide those luxuries to the formerly wealthy person. But if it can, it must. That law is on the books. Why? Well, first, there's a practical reason. It's far more difficult to provide luxuries for a formerly wealthy person than it is to prevent a wealthy person from becoming poor in the first place. So if the community knows it's going to have that obligation, it'll step in early, provide a loan or a tax break or an investment in the business to stop the wealthy person from becoming poor. Second, it teaches us to be sensitive. The wealthy person who's reduced to poverty, who now has to beg for assistance, is going to be far more embarrassed than somebody who was always poor. In fact, the sages tell us that every few generations a family will lose its wealth. But there's an antidote for that. If a wealthy person, if someone who has all his needs provided for, asks for money on behalf of the poor, then that person during that time is considered as if they're poor. Those calls asking for money are so demeaning, so awkward, that that's considered poverty on its own. And so imagine, if a wealthy person asking for funds is considered poor, how much more embarrassed a poor person is who has to ask for funds on his own. And third, the wealthy person, back when he had his funds, if he was following the law, he was helping the poor in the community. They were lined up at his house seeking the assistance that he was always happy to give. And now the tables have turned. This gives the community the opportunity to repay that debt by supporting him at his former lifestyle. Now, parents will sometimes say to a child, "Do as I say, not as I do." But God doesn't do that. God says, "Do as I say and do." And so not surprisingly, if you look for it, you'll find an example of this principle at work in the Torah. Many, many years ago, when the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, a little baby was born. And his parents put this baby boy in an ark in the Nile to try to save his life so he wouldn't be killed by Pharaoh's henchmen. And sure enough, that little baby, baby Moses, baby Moshe, was discovered by Pharaoh's daughter. And he was raised in the palace. And he became the overseer in the palace. He was running Pharaoh's palace. Can you imagine how gorgeous Pharaoh's palace must have been? And Moshe's room probably looked like the presidential suite at the Four Seasons in Cairo. And I don't know how many horsepower Moshe's supercharged chariot had, but I guarantee you it was a sweet ride. Yet, when Moshe saw the Egyptian beating the Jew, he struck him down and killed him in order to save the Jew. But when he did so, he became a fugitive. He had to flee to Midian without a penny to his name. He gave up all of his extraordinary wealth and possessions. And sure enough, years later, God restored him to his former level of extraordinary wealth. We're told that the second time Moshe went up on Mount Sinai to receive the second set of the luchos, the second tablets containing the Ten Commandments, God told Moshe to carve them himself. And they were carved from a block of sapphire. And God told Moshe that he could keep the chips that were created when he carved those letters. Can you imagine what price would those chips fetch at a Sotheby's auction? Authenticated chips that were carved by Moshe from the tablets of sapphire when carving the Ten Commandments. And so let's keep these lessons in mind. The next time a poor person calls us for a donation or a loan, the next time a wealthy person calls us on behalf of the poor, or the next time we're asked to make calls on behalf of the poor, if we respond generously, we'll enrich not only the lives of the poor, but also our own lives.